So good afternoon, everyone. This is RCEA Board Clerk Lori Taketa with some announcements. For those of you who are here at the Jefferson Community Center, the microphones are on throughout the meeting. Please speak clearly, one person at a time, and say your name when you start talking so that the people who are online or on the phone can follow the discussion. We have an online board member today, Director Bauer, so please keep your camera on throughout the meeting and your mic off unless you're going to speak. For community members commenting on agenda items, no one's here right now, but come to the podium if you are able so the microphone picks up your voice. Online participants, please click raise hands, the raise hand button in the webinar controls. Phone participants, press *9 to raise your hand, *6 to unmute. And please raise your hand early so staff doesn't miss you. Public comment may be limited to 3 minutes at the chair's discretion. Emailed comments are being accepted at publiccomment@redwoodenergy.org until the chair closes the public comment period for that agenda item. And remote participants, if your meeting connection is disrupted, please notify us if you can by calling or texting 707-382-7336, the number on your screen, or by emailing publiccomment@redwoodenergy.org. For today's meeting, we have a special study session with time for questions, and our Executive Director, Elizabeth Burks, is going to talk about how that part of the meeting will run and whether there are any time limits for questions. Vice Chair Wu.
All right. Thank you, Lori. So I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting and also this special study session. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Director Arroyo is absent. Chair Bauer?
Here.
And Chair Bauer, is there anyone 18 years or older in the room with you?
No.
No, and you're participating by for Just Cause, travel for agency business, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Director Diaz from Fortuna is absent. And Director Garachi?
I'm here.
Director Jorgensen?
Here.
Director Ramos?
Here.
Director Scafani? Here. Director Schaefer is absent. Director Kelly from Trinidad.
Hello.
Director Wilson.
Here.
And Vice Chair Wu.
Here.
There is a quorum.
All right, great. Thank you. So next up we have, let's see, we did that. Reports from member entities. Is there anybody from the board that would like to speak on general matters? No. Okay, I'm going to close that. Next up is oral and written communications. This time is provided for people to address the board or submit written communications on matters that are not on the agenda. And at the end of this part, the board may respond to statements, but any request that requires board action will be set by the board for a future agenda or referred to staff. So any oral and written communications from anybody in the room? Not seeing any, anybody online? Will that be Scott?
No.
And then, was there any written, like emails or anything like that? No. Okay, great. All right, oral and written communications is closed. Consent calendar. All matters on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the board and are enacted in one motion, but we can discuss these things separately. And if you want to do so, we pull that item and consider it separately. So I'll go ahead and read the consent calendar, and then I'll take it out to the board. If any of the board members want to pull it out, then I'll take it out to the public. They want to play. So here we go. 4.1, approved minutes of March 27, 2025 board meeting. 4.2, approve the disbursements report. 4.3, accept the financial reports. 4.4, approve the following amendment to extend the professional services agreement for Rural Rend North startup activities through May 31st, 2025. 1. Amendment number 2 with the Sierra Business Council in the amount of $390,754. Amendment number 1 with Lake Area Planning Council in the amount of $88,884. Number 3, amendment number 1 with Mendocino Council of Governments in the amount of $88,436. And authorize the executive director to execute all applicable documents. 4.5, award professional services agreement to Energy Resources Integration to perform the NREN commercial energy assessment for a not to exceed value of 200,000 and authorize the executive director to execute all applicable documents. So looking to the board, does anybody want to pull any of these items off consent? Nope. Anybody in the room? Nope. And anybody online? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved. Second.
All right. Oh, wait, do we have to do a roll call vote? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Director Arroyo, absent. Director Bauer,
Aye.
Director Diaz, absent. Director Garachi,
Yes.
Director Jorgensen,
Yes.
Director Ramos,
Yes.
Director Scafani,
Yes.
Director Schaefer is absent. Director Kelly.
Aye.
Director Wilson.
Yeah.
Chair Wu, Vice Chair Wu.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you, everybody. Anything removed? So now we have the study session on electricity affordability.
Hey, I'll kick us off.
Thank you, Beth.
Okay, great. And thank you so much to all of you for being here. And for those attending online, we really, we try to put a lot of effort into this study session. And the idea of this really came from some board comments mentioning that they were getting calls from their constituents worried about electricity bills. And really wanting to help all of you have some tools as you talk with folks in the community about how to answer some of those questions. Also, along those same lines, I've been providing updates on the call log the last few months, and you'll notice that we've gotten a lot of calls at our CEA also worried about affordability. And it's also a very big topic statewide as we interact with different policymakers. So all of that kind of culminated in it's a really good time to kind of get on the same page and share some information about affordability in relation to electricity bills. So our goals for today is that we'll leave here with a deeper understanding of rates and bills, kind of the differences and the cost drivers behind them. And then you'll have a fuller picture of what RCA is doing about it and how all of you can help. So I have a couple quick just housekeeping items. We are going to ask that everyone hold their questions to the end. We have kind of a full lineup of staff at your disposal. And we'll all be taking our part in giving the presentation. You should have received in front of you the slides with kind of notes sections. So that would be a great place to jot down any questions you have, and we'll be happy to work through all of them at the end. So as I mentioned, we've got quite the lineup of speakers for you today. I'm going to lead the way with kind of an overview of why we're so concerned about affordability. I'll hand it over to Marisha, who's going to discuss understanding your bill. Richard will take an overview of the rates, and then we have others that are going to talk about the affordability and kind of how it relates to RCA. So we've got Ben and Faith here that'll talk about different aspects of how we're handling it. So we look forward to this and also answering your questions at the end. So why do we care about affordability? And I'll say, leading this off, I want to note that there's many factors that are influencing affordability related to our electricity bills. And we want to give you a good overview of the rates, but I want to just note that there's safety, reliability, clean energy, innovative programs, all of that needing to get balanced with affordability. So it's not just one factor, and some of these RCA has more or less control over. Not all of them are kind of in our wheelhouse to even be able to influence in a meaningful way. But there are ways we can contribute to improving them. So just to say that it is a balancing act, and we take that into consideration as we figure out how to address policy. So primarily we're concerned because affordability is absolutely an equity issue, and especially in our community. So the California Public Utilities Commission applies an affordability ratio to identify areas of affordability concern. And when there is a concentration of households earning the lowest 20% of incomes for an area, and those households are spending more than 15% of their income on their electricity bill, and this is income after they spend on housing and other utilities, that's what creates this area of affordability concern. So that's a definition coming straight from the California Public Utilities Commission. And what that means for Humboldt County is that most of our county falls within an area of affordability concern. The exception to this is really right around Humboldt Bay. I think part of that is it just really benefits from the very mild climate and lower usage there. But a good majority of our county falls in these areas of affordability concern. And the lowest 20% of income earners in our community are earning about $18,000 a year. So we, I'm going to just note that this next figure is very generalized, but doing some quick math, kind of thinking of average rents, average utility costs, things like water and other things people have to pay for. We're looking at someone with 18,000, being able to pay in the ballpark of around $30 to $40 for their like PG&E bill. That would be what would be affordable. That is a very lean bill. I don't know if you can think of your own bill and what that amount is. But getting that down to $30 or $40, at least for myself, I know feels like that would be a pretty impossible lift. So just to kind of put it in context, and again, we have affordability concern with 20% of our households in these areas, earning that level of income. There are programs that can help make electricity more affordable, and that primarily includes the CARE and FARA programs. These are discounts of 20% or more. You get income qualified for these. They're kind of on a tier. The FARA program, you need to have 3 or more people in your household. But the bottom line that I really want to point out here is we have almost 30% of our customers on these programs. So just a kind of indicator of how important affordability is for our community. A full 30% or close to 30% are really struggling in needing assistance. And I will say that not everyone who qualifies is enrolled in these programs. So it's probably underrepresenting. And another indicator of affordability or, kind of a metric we can think of is how many, the total arrears we have over time. How many people just have like literally stopped paying their electricity bill? And so you see that kind of in those COVID years, 21, 22, there was a really steep increase in that. It was a very acute problem. We kind of leveled off after that for a little bit, but it is rising again. So we know that affordability is, kind of top of mind, creating these impacts for people in our community and our customers. So as we launch into the presentation today and kind of go over all the different things influencing that, we thought it would be really helpful to kind of start with like, what is on your bill? How do you even read it? So with that, I want to turn it over to Marisha, who can kind of give us that overview and get us a little more familiar with all the different things kind of plugging into an electricity bill.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Marisha Ramirez. I am RCEA's Account Services Manager, and I'm going to present the Understanding Your Bill portion of this presentation. So to start, we have an example bill of what a customer's first page of the PG&E bill looks like. Before I continue, I want to note that a couple of the numbers on this billing example have been changed for privacy purposes. You also have this at your table as well. A little hard to see up there. So on the first page, customers can find, apart from just their PG&E charges, their total RCEA charges. So that's the first part being highlighted there for you all to see. If a customer has a payment plan, here is where the customer will be able to see that installment plan. So that bottom right hand red square with the green around it. That's where if you have an installment plan, this is where you're going to be able to see your total current charges totaled, as well as that installment payment plan amount. So in this scenario, the 2604 is getting applied towards that previous unpaid balance, and then the 367 amount is the total current charges. I will note the current charges of $367.79 shown in this billing example is below that of the average customers on this particular rate. It's also important to recognize that this billing example will not reflect all energy costs for customers that might have like propane or wood heating, for example. If a customer is enrolled in programs such as CARE, FARA, or Medical Baseline, you'll see that on the bottom left-hand corner. Now on the PG&E bill, this is just like at the very top half with the bill, so it'll be in the center area. Next, we have the details of Redwood Coast Energy Authority electric generation charges page. The RCEA details page can often be found anywhere between the 3rd or the 8th page of the bill, depending on what rate people are on and how many pages they have in their bill. On this details page, customers can find their total usage there at the top. So if on your handout, it's on the top right-hand corner. RCEA's contact information is listed just below that. I wanted to note that RCEA is looking to phase out our 1-800 phone number. We found that the 1-800 number is so minimal that there's basically no benefit to keeping it for our customers. So we're going to make that transition as a cost saving measure, hopefully by the end of this fiscal year. Next, I will point out that this is where you can also find what rate you're on. So in this example, you'll see that the customer is on ETOUD rate. And I wanted to also note that the majority of customers in Humboldt County, residential customers, are on the ETOUC rate. The difference between those rates is that ETOUC's peak pricing is going to be every day from 4 to 9 p.m., whereas ETOUD's peak pricing is going to be Monday through Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. And on this same page, you could also see the generation charges, so you can see your on and off peak charges as well. And again, the total RCA charge that was also listed on the first page of the PG&E bill. And next, I'm going to direct you to the PG&E electricity delivery charges page. So this is PG&E's page. I'm going to go over in a later slide how to calculate your bill savings. So this is why I'm going over this page as well. So to do this calculation, first, you're going to want to find the PG&E electric delivery charges page and find the generation credit listed on the bill. On the bill, it's always going to show us a negative amount if you're a CCA customer. Next, you'll find the PCIA, and then, which is the power charge and differential adjustment that we always refer to as the PCIA. And you'll also want to find the franchise fee. And so finally, we will calculate using the numbers we just went over. So to start, you will take the total RCEA charge from either the first page of the PG&E bill or the RCEA details page. This is that 3622 highlighted there. And you will want to subtract both the PCIA and franchise fees from this amount to get your comparable amount. And then you're going to take that PG&E generation credit amount that I said would always show in a negative amount on the PG&E page. And you're going to want to deduct that comparable amount to get that savings of, on this example, shown as 29 cents. And just as a reminder, not everybody's bill is going to have a savings of 29 cents. And this is also not quite accurate as we adjusted some of the numbers. But I also wanted to point out that when we say we're a 0.5% discount cheaper to PG&E, that's specific to our rates only. So that's that section where I pointed out the generation, the on and off peak generation rates. And that is all I have for you. I'll pass it on to Ben.
Thank you, Marisha.
Yeah.
I'm Richard Engel, Director of Power Resources. And I'm just going to go through a few slides that talk about how rates work that make up that bill that Marisha just went over with us. This graph shows a breakdown between the part of the bill that is the charges that RCEA is assessing to customers versus the remainder of the electric bill that's the PG&E transmission, distribution, and other charges. In this case, we're using ETOUC as the example. This is a residential rate that the majority of our residential customers are on. So you can see in this current example, the sum of those makes up 42.35 cents per kilowatt hour. For me, the most striking thing about this graph is that if I had shown you this same information back when we first launched our program in 2017, it was back then, it was a roughly 50-50 split between RCEA generation charges and the TNG charges from PG&E. And this really illustrates how much more dramatically TND charges from the distribution utility have increased compared to generation costs. And again, since we hold our generation costs very close to PG&E's generation costs. If we were looking at a bundled customer's bill that was not taking service from RCA, this would look very, very similar. So regardless of whether you're in RCA's program or not, nowadays, the great majority of costs of being an electric customer come from the transmission and distribution of electricity. The small green slice over on the side there is the power charge and difference adjustment and franchise fee, which Marisha talked about, and we'll hear more about the PCIA in particular later on in this presentation. You can see those are currently a pretty small sliver. We've gone through phases where the PCIA was a much larger part of the bill, but currently, at this moment in time, it's not that big of a contributor to the costs. So when customers are paying for electricity, what do they really care about? They don't really care about rates. They care about the bill. And let's keep in mind that a bill is the product of the rate multiplied by the usage. So really addressing affordability needs to get at both of those things. We want low rates for customers' benefit, but we also want usage to be under control. And the good news there is that long before we were ever a CCA program, RCA going back to 2003 has been providing programs, and Ben has been running some of those programs since almost since the inception of RCEA. So I'm just really proud that we're an agency that's well equipped to address the usage part of the equation. Even though my team is a bit more focused on the rates, I'm really glad that we're kind of tackling both sides of that. I will say, historically, programs like RCEA have really tried to reduce people's electricity use to keep those bills under control. But, nowadays we're engaged in some things that can work against that. Although we see a larger benefit in it. Specifically, I'm talking about promoting electrification. So we are, having programs that give rebates on things like electric vehicles and e-bikes, and we're, encouraging people through rebates and other means to adopt electric heat pumps. These are all things that are replacing other fuels different than electricity, whether it's gasoline for cars or natural gas for home heating. So on the whole, these things should reduce people's total costs for energy, and certainly are helping to address climate change by, electricity that nowadays is largely coming from non-emitting resources, whether it's renewables or hydropower. RCEA sees the benefits in getting people to do this fuel switching, but on the whole, it can increase electricity use. So we just have to keep that in mind. We might actually see people's usage going up just through making good choices like replacing a natural gas furnace with an electric heat pump. Another thing I'll mention is just that climate change is another contributing factor here. Maybe less so in most of Humboldt County, but certainly in the eastern parts of the county where there's significant cooling load, people do have air conditioning in some homes, and their usage of that will go up as we have increased climate change. Where we do get more severe winters, we might see also increased electric use for heat pumps in the winter time. Just climate change is another factor to consider in what can be driving people's bills up. So going back to the question of rates, how do our rates and the bills that result from them compare with PG&E, with California, and the bottom of this slide is cut off. I think we need to make an adjustment in the display here. It's cut off.
We can see it in there. Yeah, I think it's visible in their handout, the bottom of the slide.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry we can't adjust it on the slide, but you should be able to see this in your handout. There's an additional row on the bottom of the table. These numbers come from various sources that are footnoted over on the right-hand side. But what you see here is that RCA's electric rates, as advertised, are a little bit below PG&E's rates. And so our total bill that customers get is correspondingly just a little bit smaller than the PG&E bill. Now, it's very interesting to compare these against California rates, which on the whole are significantly lower by about a third below PG&E or RCEA rates. However, the electric bill for California customers is a little bit higher than the RCEA/PG&E bills. The rates are lower, and I'll get to why the rates are lower in the next slide. The US rates are lower still by about almost half below California rates. And the bills correspondingly, because those rates are so dramatically much lower, the bills are smaller, even though in a lot of cases, electric usage in other parts of the country is higher because of more severe climates, more summertime cooling and more wintertime heating. So looking at the California bill being larger, even though the rates are lower compared with RCEA and PG&E, the usage is generally higher across California than it is in PG&E because PG&E is serving Northern California, which has a milder climate than Southern California. So the customers in Southern California, Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric service areas typically have higher usage than we do here.
That California number is Southern California?
No, it's California overall, so it's just a blend of costs everywhere. But the Southern California usage pushes it so much higher that people wind up with, across the state on average, wind up with higher bills. Also just, you know, as a reminder, this does not include gas. This is really just looking at electricity. So why are those California rates overall so much lower than PG&Es or RCEAs? The answer really mainly lies in municipal utilities. Munis serve about a quarter of the electric load in California. Munis, the two really big ones in the state are LA Department of Water and Power and SMUD that serves Sacramento area. And closer to us, there's Redding has an electric utility, Ukiah, Trinity Public Utilities District that serves most of Trinity County. Their rates tend to be far lower than the PG&E rates. Just as one example, Alameda, where my sister lives, their city electric utility charges between 12 and 29 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on which tier of usage the customer is. And so compare that against those rates that we were looking at of around 45 cents a kilowatt hour for PG&E whose rates we're basing ours on. So that makes for much lower bills. However, I will say, you know, we noted a minute ago that the bills tend to be higher than they are in our service area. And I explained that was partly because of just geography and climate. I do think, though, also that you sometimes see higher usage in the muni service areas because those lower rates might put less of a brake on people's energy usage. So, you know, high rates can, you know, result in a behavioral response. I'm going to turn now to something that I spend a lot of my time working on at RCEA, which is our power procurement. So first of all, let's look at our costs to procure power, which naturally play an important role in rate setting, potentially more so as we look at adopting cost of service rates in the future. Commodity prices fluctuate a lot. They've been wildly dynamic the last few years. But on the whole, as you can see, the costs have just gone up unsteadily, not steadily, but they've gone up. The budget for procuring power includes buying the energy itself, just the megawatt hours that we buy to meet our customer load. We're also required by the state to pay for resource adequacy, which is just paying electric generators for guaranteed amounts of capacity that their plants provide to the grid. And then we pay for renewable energy certificates, the credits that are attributed with renewable energy sources that make that incrementally more expensive than just buying brown power, the non-renewable kind. And we make some expenditure on carbon-free energy, which is, as a reminder, just the forms of energy that are not classified as renewable but don't have carbon emissions. So in our case, that almost always means large hydropower. The board did make a decision last year to accept an allocation of carbon-free nuclear energy as well. This is just a kind of a historic look since launching our program in 2017 and also looking out into the future at our clean energy trajectory. When we were first planning our program, this was intended to be kind of a steady march towards cleaner power. The green slices at the bottom represent the percentage of our portfolio each year that's renewable. The blue slices represent the part that's that carbon-free, which, like I said, is usually hydropower. And then the gray slices at the top are just the unspecified power, which means the energy that we're buying that does not have carbon-free or renewable attributes to it. We started out pretty strong with only 11% of our portfolio being from that unspecified category. And the intent was to kind of keep steadily building the size of the green and blue slices year by year. As you know, we've gone through some financial shocks and setbacks, which for the large part were experienced by other energy providers in California as well. And the board made some strategic decisions along the way to dial that back. So we did go back down, pretty low on our renewable and carbon-free procurement in 2021, for example, was kind of the one extreme case of that. But on the whole, we've been making progress in the right direction and really gotten back in the saddle in the last year with our highest renewable portfolio procurement to date happening this year. So that's the good news, is we're able to do this. But why are we talking about this in an affordability presentation? It's because these choices to procure clean power do have cost implications. How much? Well, just under current market conditions, and like I've said, these are pretty volatile. The cost of energy changes, the cost of the renewable energy certificates changes, the resource adequacy certainly changes. But under current market conditions, for each additional 1% of renewable energy that we procure voluntarily above what the state requires us to get, we're adding about 4% to our power procurement costs. So inevitably that does figure into the affordability equation, although we're currently setting our rates just following PG&E's. By spending more on energy, it means if we're not changing the rates, we're putting less money into reserves or spending less on customer programs. And I'll just mention that that photo there is just illustrative of our continuing efforts to build that renewable energy portfolio locally. I know the photo aesthetically looks nice, but it's also kind of silly because it's got solar panels facing towards each other. That's the Foster Solar and Storage Project that's currently under construction in the Arcata Bottom. So Brighton from our team was out there taking some photos, and they just kind of had the panels facing any which way because they haven't actually hooked them up to the grid yet. It's still under installation. And with that, I will hand things over to Faith to talk to you about power charge and difference adjustment.
Hi, Faith Carlson, Regulatory and Legislative Policy Manager. I'm going to talk about the PCIA, or Power Charge and Difference Adjustment, and some policy drivers related to it, as well as other policy drivers associated with rates. So what is the PCIA? So before we get into it, it kind of goes by other names. You may have heard it called the departing load charge, a non-bypassable charge, stranded cost, or exit fee. Those are all terms that you may hear the PCIA referred to as. Some background: in a world before CCAs or munis existed, IOUs built generating assets and resources to serve all of their customers and assumed that all customer load would go to them. Well, once munis and CCAs later were established, IOUs argued that they wouldn't have built all of those resources to the same scale had they known that they weren't going to serve those departing customers. So they argued that to the CPUC and to legislation, and that was successful. And it was ruled that departing customers, that's us, should pay bundled customers the difference between what those portfolios originally cost to build and their current market value. So this materializes as a $1 per kilowatt charge on electric bills, which Marisha went over previously. And those charges do vary depending on vintage. That vintage is defined as the year that your CCA was established. And as more of these legacy generation resources retire, the PCIA theoretically should go down as resources fall out of the vintage. Why are we paying it? State law. Who pays it? It is also paid by bundled customers. I think that's a common misconception. While we are paying it and so are PG&E poll customers. And it does impact us in that in order to stay competitive with PG&E, we have to keep in mind that the PCIA needs to be accounted for in our rates. And I have a couple of slides that will graphically illustrate that. So what you see here on the left is a representation of the amount the IOUs paid for resources that aren't needed anymore due to customers moving to CCA service. And then you have the current market value of those resources on the right. And current market value of those resources, how that's calculated, is currently being deliberated at the CPUC. Our CEA is actively involved in that proceeding. The PCIA is that little pink slice that just popped up that makes up that difference. Now, we do receive an allocation of power from resources that we pay for through the PCIA. And yeah, this slide is on a little bit of a different item here. We have the IOU rate on the left. And then we have the CCA rate on the right as the lower blue bar. And then that little orangey marigold section is the PCIA. As you can see that in order to stay competitive with the IOU rate, you can't just compare our gen rate to the IOU rate. You need to compare our rate plus the PCIA to the IOU rate. And that comparison, how much wiggle room we have before we go over their gen rate, is called headroom. It's also worth noting that our generation rate includes not just our procurement costs, but also our business operation costs and our customer programs, whereas IOU generation rates only cover their generation costs. And those other items are put into their transmission and distribution rates. So we're having to do a lot more with a lot less, which makes it that much more impressive that we're able to be a lower price than PG&E. There are some additional drivers to how bills change and rates in policy other than PCIA. Policy decisions overall are the main driver of customer bills in California, where, you know, it could be an increase in your total bill or it could be a decrease. Previously, political support for energy efficiency programs made it so that even though California rates were higher than in the rest of the US, total bills tended to be lower. And only recently has that trend changed as rates have gone up more. But total energy burden or what proportion of your income is going to your energy bill isn't the only metric that the state is measuring policy against. They're also looking at equity, carbon emissions, outage rates, access to the grid. And some of these policies are things that the RCEA board supports, and they do contribute to rates going up at times. So, you know, us, like the whole state, is working together to balance what policy priorities are most important and allow us to have a clean, accessible, reliable, safe, and affordable grid. So just to define a couple of these terms that I just rattled off, grid access, I think you're familiar with clean energy goals, safety and affordability. Grid access is related to whether resources and new loads can connect to the grid, and if that can be done in a timely manner. Reliability is related to power outages, and then safety kind of captures a few more things that I just want to add is wildfire safety, battery safety standards, and then grid maintenance standards are all included in there as well. And earlier in the presentation, we did have a slide, it was in the first couple, where there was a scale and there's all of these things stacked against affordability. We could present that slide in any way where we could say that everything is stacked against our clean energy goals, or everything is stacked against reliability, and we're going to have to make some kind of compromise in the push and pull of policy in order to achieve a portion of any of one of those goals. So costs that are driven by the policy priorities, we have generation costs, wildfire costs, rooftop solar costs, rate structures, and T&D investments. I'm going to go into just a selection of those cost drivers, and then you should have a little handout with some more, as well as proposals that are floating around the state. I will say, I don't want to be talking and then have you reading this, because it's going to be a distraction, so please review this later.
So for transmission and distribution costs, generation build out is driving a substantial increase in T&D or transmission distribution need because we have a large amount of new resources needed in order to reach California climate change goals. And those resources, when they're renewable, are very location dependent. And that location is not always close to where people are using the power. So we're having to build longer transmission and distribution lines than we used to previously. This is causing an increase in the T&D rate because it used to represent just maintenance and small grid upgrades for reliability, whereas now we're having to really overhaul the system. Also, unfortunately, there's been an increase in components for grid infrastructure. So that's another additional cost increase. And policy, of course, is going to lead to other changes. We've got offshore wind transmission that's going to be an increased cost. We might have increased infrastructure for data centers and other new large loads, also including transportation electrification, which can be a large load, and gas system transition. There are some ways we can get these costs down. There are proposals floating around the state to streamline permitting for environmental transmission projects as well as renewable power projects. There's a discussion of increased coordination with neighboring states. And of course, we can always look at IOU profits. So I've got a section on the page there as well. I know it's been said before, but IOUs can take a profit on their infrastructure build out only. So this does incentivize them to do more infrastructure build out, and that can be, it's sometimes referred to as a perverse incentive. So there's some proposals related to IOU profit management on here that we can look at. We also have seen a substantial rate increase related to wildfire safety. It's actually the fastest growing cost, now at 20% of the total rate. There are a few proposals that I'm going to highlight related to lowering wildfire costs. There are a lot floating around right now this legislative session, especially with the SoCal fires. One is to change the wildfire spending approval process. Rather than having small applications to increase rates for wildfire spending, look at it holistically and approve all at once. Also looking into researching creative technologies to make undergrounding power lines more affordable. And another alternative is to look at taking parts of wildfire spending off of bills and putting it into the general fund or other funding sources, such as vegetation management, having Forest Service have a bigger involvement in that, or having state funding for extreme catastrophic weather-related events. And this is a kind of a hot topic too. So we have solar subsidies and whether or not there's a solar cost shift and what that even is. So generally, when there's a discount given to customers and it's funded through rates, another customer has to pay for that discount to be given. And that's called a cost shift. And as an example, non-CareFair customers pay a slightly higher rate in order to allow for there to be a CareFair subsidy for those low-income customers that need it. And that's deemed a necessary cost shift for equities. I want to repeat that. Just because there's a cost shift, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a positive or negative thing. So when California first came up with the solar cost subsidies on rates, there was a really big need for solar to be put onto the grid and not a lot of customers taking that up. So they made the incentive pretty aggressive through NEM, Net Energy Metering 1.0. Later, as solar gained popularity, the state deemed that they didn't have to have as high of a subsidy and potentially that there was less grid benefit as you added incrementally more solar. So they have since then stepped down the subsidy twice. So there's still a lot of ongoing debate about what to do with those legacy customers that are still on the higher incentive and if the newest rate is correctly addressing the cost shift and to what degree the cost shift even is a problem and how to quantify that. So we're tracking this really closely. I have a few proposals on here too, so for review later, but we are always happy to talk about which proposals the board supports and do a deep dive on solar at a later point if we need to. So all of this is to say that policy drivers have a pretty big influence on rates, and you can see here a general rate trend. The RCEA and PG&E rates are shown bundled with identical transmission and distribution rates, inclusive of the PCIA. And you can see that that's the blue line. Sorry, the gray line. And then the blue line is transmission and distribution, and that's been increasing more steadily. Generation, you can see, is pretty stable. So our side of the bill has been staying relatively level, while the T&D side is going up much more rapidly. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Richard and Ben so that they can cover what we are doing as an agency to help customers combat these rate increases.
All right, thank you, Faith. So this is mostly going to be presented by Ben, but before he starts talking about specific program activities that RCA is doing to help with affordability, I just wanted to talk about one bit that falls more within our Power Resources Department's purview, which is rate offerings that can be done innovatively to help customers save. Because of high electric rates in California, we saw earlier how they're approximately double rates elsewhere in the country. Electric providers like RCA risk losing industrial and commercial customers that can potentially relocate to a different state, or maybe would just go out of business if relocating isn't an option for them. So we saw that as, you know, a risk here in Humboldt, just like it can be everywhere else in California. So back in 2021, the board authorized having a non-standard pricing agreement policy that could be used as a basis for negotiated rate agreements with large customers. Kind of the immediate cause of having that discussion was the emergence of Nordic Aqua Farms, who were interested in getting kind of the most competitive electric rate they could. And it was a large enough customer that we thought, you know, getting them as an RCA customer would be a very different outcome than having them go over to PG&E or get direct access from a different electric provider. So the board saw the necessity of setting up a framework for allowing for negotiated rates that could potentially be more affordable for these customers, provided that we didn't design those rates in such a way that would put a greater cost burden on our other customer classes. Actually implementing something like that has been put on hold as the Nordic project has moved along more slowly than originally expected. But we do have that framework in place. With that, I'll hand it over to Ben.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Ben Matteo, Senior Program Manager for RCEA, and I'll be talking to you about customer programs. And we'll start with public agencies. And first, I just want to say that RCA brings in several sources of external funding that enable us to offer additional services for customers. In fact, the majority of our customer program services are funded externally. So for public agencies, this would include, you know, everything from municipal to tribal governments, schools, fire stations, even other joint powers agencies. We're able to offer a suite of services that includes things like energy assessments. We have incentives available. We have referrals to other programs. Oftentimes, folks aren't aware of all the vast programs that are available through either PG&E or other implementers out there. So we kind of keep our hands on the pulse of all the external programs and are able to help customers align with sources of either incentives or financing. We also offer project management assistance, benchmarking, and long-term planning. And of course, for our public agencies, you know, by making them more efficient, energy resilient, and helping to lower their carbon footprint, we're not only reducing their operating costs, but we're helping them become leaders for our community. So we really try to do a lot for our public agencies. So the way that we're offering these services right now are through our local government partnership with PG&E is one of our mechanisms. So that's a longstanding contract that we've had. So that dates all the way back to pretty much the inception of RCEA. I've personally been involved with the LGP contract since 2006. And it's a way for us to bring additional resources into Humboldt County. And specifically, that program targets public agencies and commercial customers. We also have our Northern Rural Energy Network program, which launched last year and has already launched several new services this year. And we have many additional services that are in the queue and being developed at this time. For the business side of things, we are targeting some of our hard-to-reach customers. And there is an official term for hard-to-reach customers that the California Public Utilities Commission uses. And it's basically businesses that either rent or own, maybe English is not the primary language, or they're a very small customer and have a very small energy use. So any of those will qualify them as hard to reach. So that's, a lot of our kind of mom and pop shops, if you will. And so things that we offer these customers are no-cost energy assessments. We offer direct incentives, referrals, and we also can help align them with different incentives and financing that are available externally as well. And I do want to say that, the energy assessment is really kind of our foot in the door. That's where we really help that business owner. Oftentimes, business owners are just so busy trying to keep their operations going that they don't have time to research what's available, what's out there, where do we even start? And that's what the energy assessment does for them. We're able to go in and help them identify, things they can take action on, set some priorities for them, and help align them with incentives and financing that's available. And by doing this, energy costs can be a large component, but we're able to, help them reduce their costs and also increase their energy resilience. We are also starting to develop some of our regional energy network commercial programs, and that's going to include some incentives for commercial businesses as well. And for that one, we will be targeting those smaller customers with some direct incentives. That could be things like heat pump incentives. It could be some lighting incentives, refrigeration incentives, and even some appliance incentives as well. On the residential side of things, we are supporting homeowners, renters, and landlords. We have a suite of services that we're currently offering that includes a free energy saving kit. The kit is $100 value. It's a lot of do-it-yourself type things that everything from like LED light bulbs to a smart power strip, low flow shower head, things like that a person can install quickly and see some pretty immediate energy savings. And that's available on the website to sign up for that one. Also, we offer a free home assessment that we are completing over the phone. And through that assessment, we can identify some areas that we can make recommendations and again, help the homeowner kind of focus where their efforts should be. So that can include things for renters, things for homeowners. Sometimes folks are just looking to replace an appliance or two, or sometimes they're ready to just do a full remodel, and we can help them at whatever stage they're at, really, meet them where they're at with their projects. We also offer rebates. So on the rebate side of things, we have appliance rebates, we have heat pump space heater rebates, and heat pump water heater rebates. We also have electric vehicle rebates, and in the past, we've had things like our e-bike rebates and EV charger rebates as well. So all of these services are available for sign up through our website at redwoodenergy.org. A lot of those are available through an online application. So through our website, you can navigate to the rebates and you can find the applications on there. And for those assessments, customers can submit a customer interest form through the website, and that'll get them started, whether they're commercial, public, or residential. That can get them in queue for one of those no-cost assessments. We're also further developing out some additional energy services through the Regional Energy Network. That's going to include things like a micro loan program as well. On the contractor side of things, we're out there supporting our local contractors. We find that many of our contractors are not able to necessarily navigate what's available when we're talking incentives, when we're talking rebates. So we're supporting them not just with our own in-house rebates, but we're actually supporting them with like the Tech Clean California rebates and how do they get enrolled in that? And how do they learn how to use the portal? We literally sit down and train them on how to use the energy portal so they can access these rebates and bring that rebate money here for their customers that are doing things like heat pump projects and other electrification type projects. We're also hosting a contractor and vendor network on our website, and that allows customers that are looking for contractors to say, okay, who in our community is doing this work? I want to install a heat pump, and they can go to our website and they can find contractors that are providing those services, and that obviously helps them, the contractors and customers. And this is being funded through both CCE monies and our regional energy network. Okay. So.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna kind of bring us home here because I think we've kind of gone through this whole process in hopes that it'll give you that broader overview of kind of like what's going on with these bills, why are they so high, what are the different things that our CEA can help with in terms of reducing usage and overall bill costs. And then there's also a component of this is like, what can all of you do to help be part of this puzzle? So that's kind of where I want to go next. And I think there's some really simple things. And one of them is, help us communicate with the customers and the public. Direct customers to these existing resources and programs. Like Ben mentioned, website is a great start. They can also give us a call. We have great customer service staff that will walk them through, kind of all the different programs you can find on the website, but also through rate options. And they can go through that same process that Marisha helped us go through in terms of what is on this bill? Why do I have these charges? What does it mean? We often hear, are we an extra charge? We are not. So we're just like giving that explanation. And as I mentioned during the updates of our call log, sometimes we'll have, I think last month it was like 26 people called saying they wanted to opt out because they just weren't sure about what these RCEA charges were. And I think we were able to convince all but one we weren't an extra charge and, kind of connect them with the information they needed to feel comfortable and as staying a customer, but also, understand other opportunities that they could avail themselves of that might help lower their bill. The other thing is to, share the information about the benefits of being an RCA customer and the actions we take in terms of bill savings. So, not only are we, 0.5% cheaper, but over, since RCEA the CCA portion of RCEA was formed, we've saved collectively ratepayers in Humboldt County $7.3 million. So it does add up. You see in Marisha's example, it's a little bit here and a little bit there, sometimes not, not huge amounts, but over the course of these several years we've been operational. That's collectively over $7 million we've saved ratepayers. So it certainly does add up. And then I would say, talk to community members and stakeholders about all of these root challenges that we've discussed. It's not just because we're trying to have cleaner energy that these bills are going up. There's a lot of factors, and those were included in Faith's presentation. So I think, being cognizant of that it's not just because we have this like ambitious goal to get to 100% clean energy. That's not the main reason they see these big increases. And then last, I'd like to offer that if anyone would like a presentation for your boards or councils, we would be happy to come. We can, bring this whole presentation. We can bring a scaled down version of it, whatever you think would be, well received, just to kind of, help others understand. We just see this as a big need in terms of just, kind of creating that space for everyone to get on the same page of where these costs are coming from and what's driving them. And then finally, help us communicate with policymakers. We really can't do this alone. In conversations and kind of preparing for this presentation, we're having a lot of internal discussions, and something I think Richard really helped us illuminate is that affordability isn't the first crisis we've experienced as a CCA. So really the whole foundation of CCAs and why we formed was to combat the climate crisis and the urgency around that. And as, CCAs launched our own and others statewide, and we became very successful at addressing that and quickly bringing on renewable sources, that created some reliability issues as we sort of phased out other types of fossil fuel powered plants. In the process, it became a little bit harder to ensure grid reliability. And so then we kind of focused on the next crisis of reliability. And with that, it may have contributed to that, along with, sort of the climate change and utilities' historic underinvestment in the infrastructure, kind of contributed to the wildfire crisis and all of the utility infrastructure challenges we see with that. So it's just to kind of say, we tell this story of, we don't want to be so myopic and like, oh, this current crisis about affordability, the solutions to that could be, for example, some of the policy realms are going around right now. The solutions could be cutting energy efficiency funding. It could be reducing our ambitious targets related to clean energy. And just to say that when we don't take the holistic approach, it's easy to kind of pick off any one of these things and think that we're gaining ground when we may not be. So as we work with our policymakers, we want to help them understand the whole picture. And I would encourage you to, take a look at the handout Faith mentioned. If you see any of these cost drivers that you're particularly interested in, want to do a deeper dive, we can absolutely do that with you. You can give us some direction on that. We could bring a whole presentation back. It's all pretty into the weeds and complicated, and we are happy to take the time to go into anything that you might be interested in, so we can kind of create that broader understanding and also have some direction from the board when we're interacting with policymakers to make sure we know which is top of mind for all of you and your constituents. So I just wanted to put that out there. There's lots of opportunities to have these discussions more broadly, and we're happy to play a role in that and work with all of you as you're out kind of in the world, representing your own jurisdictions, but also representing our CEA. And so with that, I want to say thank you. Certainly thank you to all the staff that put, kind of a whole lot of effort into preparing this presentation. And then thank you to all of you for being here to listen to it. We really hope, we're kind of going into an exploration in the coming months of cost of service. And we kind of hope this primer can be useful as we consider those options as well, just kind of getting us all on the same page in sort of these aspects of affordability and what's impacting bills. So with that, I would love to open it up to questions. I don't know if we have any public online, but we can, take questions from the board and then see if we've got any public commenters. Yeah.
Add one. So with the transmission and distribution charges or costs or charges, where can you find that in the bill?
Yeah, there is a page on that, which is identified as the PG&E charges.
Yeah,
So
the details.
Is it baked into the rate charge, or is it a specific line item?
let's go back to the slide.
It's
We're getting close.
the details of PG&E electric delivery charges.
It's the 57.
On the handout, it's the one that,
Oh, it's on the very first page. Delivery charges there.
the very first page shows both. And then we showed you guys the details of RCEA, and then we showed you the PG&E electric delivery charges. I would say though, in the actual bill, we reversed the order just because of what we were presenting, but in the actual bill, you're gonna see the PG&E electric delivery charges before you'll see the RCEA charges ever. So that's why our bill is kind of buried and people don't even know.
I thought it might have been in the rate. So I asked that because it looks like, price to the customer is 47 cents, or thereabouts. Off peak, it's 43. But when you generate it, the credit you get is 14 cents. Why such a large difference?
I'm sorry, can you?
So when I'm buying the energy per kilowatt hour, I pay 47 cents a kilowatt hour. But when I generate it, I get a credit at 14 cents.
Yeah.
How come such a big difference?
Well, because the generation, again, is only a portion, and the 45 cents is inclusive of the T&D and the power charging difference adjustment. So those.
But the T&D is listed on the front. Is it baked in? That's why I asked if it was baked into the rate number or if it's a line item rate.
Yeah,
It says current PG&E electric delivery charge, $57. So is that the fee, or is it also in the 40, is it also in the actual rate?
yeah, the PG&E electric delivery charges, that 57.95, that is shown as a cost per kilowatt hour on the page that says details of PG&E electric energy charges.
But it's actually in the rate?
Yes.
On the slide 28, I think is what, are you referring to slide 28?
What I'm trying to do is figure out
Yeah.
how come the difference is so much? And I figured, oh, it's got to be transmission charge, which is why I asked about.
This is why I said, like, remember we looked at that bar graph and I showed you how 2/3 of the charge roughly is T&D and 1/3 is generation. So that's supported here because that 15 cents for generation is roughly 1/3 of 45 cents.
Gotcha.
overall.
It is in the rate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question related to your comparison of California and US rates. And is there any estimation of the types of power that are being incorporated into those rates in terms of, you know, solar, nuclear, gas, all those things? I mean, looking at the US average of 16 cents, it's pretty hard to wrap your brain around that one.
Yeah.
So why?
No, you've identified a really important reason why that's so different, because California does have a much greener portfolio than the US overall. So, you know, large parts of the US are still heavily dependent on coal power. And the coal power is mostly coming from pretty old plants, you know, where they've already recouped they've amortized the capital cost of building those plants. So all they're really paying for now is some O&M and the cost of the coal fuel itself. So those plants, you know, are pretty cheap to run. Same with large natural gas plants, and even more so with hydropower plants, which there's not even a fuel cost there really. It's just O&M on the plant once they've amortized the original capital costs. So if you were to look at other utilities across the country, they have a lot of that. Now, working against that is nuclear. Nuclear power has proven to be quite expensive in most cases. They've had huge cost overruns where these plants have cost an order of magnitude more than they were originally budgeted to cost. The New Yorker has a good article about nuclear in one of the recent issues that I just read a few days ago that talks about those cost overruns. But if you average it all out, then electricity is much cheaper to generate outside of California. You know, and that's partly, you know, we're making more investment in new plants, so still recovering the capital cost of relatively new solar and wind projects and geothermal projects and things like that. And then just, you know, land is more expensive here, labor is more expensive. So all those other things that go into the cost of building and operating power plants just tend to be more expensive here.
In California, then, could you elaborate on how the munis are providing power for so much less?
Yeah, and we didn't really talk about the profit motive, right? You know, with the investor-owned utilities, but a lot of your bill is going into the pockets of shareholders, and munis don't have that. You know, that's an important consideration. Another thing I'll say is the munis in California are pretty old. Some of them are actually even older than PG&E and the investor-owned utilities. You know, cities like Alameda, when electricity was still a new thing, they established a municipal electric utility right off the bat, and they were the first to electrify the city of Alameda. Same with Palo Alto, which I used to work for. You know, these are very old utilities as electric utilities go, and they did a lot of their capital investment very early on, and they're still getting electricity from, you know, hydro dams that were built, you know, in some cases more than a century ago. So they've got, you know, relatively cheap sources of power, and they're not trying to return profit to shareholders. And I think those are probably the two main factors in why those are less expensive. And they tend to be pretty lean, streamlined operations too. You know, having worked for a couple of those munis myself, you know, they pride themselves on being really efficient operations, and not having a lot of fat that needs trimming.
So under this IOU cost capital, there's this last bullet, implement public infrastructure ownership model. That essentially touches on the same savings mechanisms that a muni has access to, right?
Yeah, so there's some new legislation around that one, that's both supporting existing munis and the development of new munis and also allowing entities like JPAs to potentially finance the development of transmission and distribution, but not necessarily operate it. And those financing mechanisms can be more affordable.
The operations would be under the IOU.
Potentially, it's still a pretty early proposal at this point.
Thing I noticed on my bills, I have solar, it's the solar true up charge. And I've always been confused about what that is. So maybe somebody take a stab at that for me.
Yeah, so are you a CCA customer? I assume that you are,
Yeah.
because you're on the board of our CEA. And I can be happy to walk you through it as well, and we can look at your bill and what's going on with it specifically, but basically, essentially what happens is PG&E trues you up, and then we true you up as well, and when PG&E trues you up, whatever credits you had, whatever credits they applied, they essentially like zero out your account and start all over every year. When you're a CCA customer with RCEA specifically, we do a March to March trip. So what that means is any generation that you accrue through the summer then goes and gets applied towards your winter bills. And then come the next spring, we look at whatever credit you have left over from that, and we actually cut you a physical check, which we're in the process of processing right now for customers. So and so there's two separate pieces of that bill that gets very easily confused by everyone, not just you.
When you say true up, but when I see my bill, that's not the actual bill. There's actually something else going on there.
Well,
Yeah.
it can work out the other way from like what Marisha was talking about is if you have an excess, then you get cut a check, but it can go the other way where you under generate in the summer relative to.
Mine always goes
in
the
the
other
winter.
way, and I'm just trying to figure
Yeah.
out like, what the heck's going on?
Yeah, and depending on what program you're on too with solar, like NEM or NEM2 or SPP, you might be only being charged like the minimal amount that PG&E is required to charge you. And then at the true up, they look at your account and be like, oh, how much should we actually have charged him? And then that's what they're doing. They're they're essentially, I don't know what a different way to describe what a true up means, but
They're not charging the generation or giving you the credit on a monthly basis. They're just tracking it, and you're paying just the flat, connection fee essentially. And then at the end of the year, you either owe them because you used more than you generated, or that if you're our customer, we owe you because you put more back on the grid than you used.
Yeah.
Have more questions? Unless-
No,
Do you have more questions?
don't have anything yet, so.
So the rate case, I have questions about how much of the, rate case dollars, will be out of what was allocated, I think 6.8 billion, this year will be toward projects on tribal land. Because I've, heard that it was $0. I've recently had a meeting with PG&E and brought it up. The reaction was, well, they didn't think they probably wasn't the case, but they also didn't give me any, specific examples. So I have a couple questions. One is, does RCEA, do we have an opportunity to advocate for how rate case dollars are spent on what infrastructure improvements? And then, how do we see exactly what the list of projects?
Yeah, good question. So the general rate case is a very, very intensive proceeding, and this is something that our CEA single-handedly could not get involved in, but our trade association, CalCCA, does get involved there a little bit more. And the general rate case, for everyone's information, is to approve transmission and distribution infrastructure upgrades as well as business operations for the IOUs. You also have the ERA, which is the Energy Resource Recovery Account. Don't quote me there.
Yeah.
And that's for their generation costs, and that's a pass-through. We also have them engage on that proceeding. We've recently become more involved in distribution planning process related proceedings. And that's kind of how they decide what projects they prioritize. And then the GRC is, okay, can we get them funded? So the prioritization is the area where we're working on some advocacy related to equity issues. And we've been engaging with the CPUC on what equity metrics they should be tracking to ensure that tribal projects aren't left out. I'm happy to give a much more detailed summary of that with slides or anything if the board is interested, or I can send you some info as well.
I'm very interested. I don't know about the rest of the board, but, you know, if we want to do it at a board meeting, that's great. I would like to know then as a board member, how I can be a part of that advocacy then as well.
We can certainly loop you in as, you know, we'll first connect you with Faith and sort of get you up to speed on where we're at with Cal CCA on that. And then we'll be happy to, you know, come up with a plan and make sure we're all on the same page. So thank you for the offer. That's awesome. Yeah, and yes, Director Bauer has his hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation, super interesting. Looking at a bill and finally understanding it personally. Not a question, but a comment. I would like to have this presentation or a modified version given to Eureka City Council. I think it'd be super informative for council and the public. And I do have a question though, maybe this is more complicated to think about, but I feel like, you know, and I understand the reasons now, like as far as more renewables come online, they require more transmission lines, you know, the infrastructure to build these renewable projects there's all these costs. The public, I think, assumes that renewables should be cheaper someday. And I guess this is the educational component that we need to figure out for the public is, you know, as we transition away from fossil fuels to renewable, you know, things should get cheaper once all the lines are in place and the infrastructure is in place. But it's a struggle to explain to people as we develop more capacity and more renewables that it's a benefit to them. You know, I mean, globally it is climate, as far as climate goes, it is. But when should they see this change in price, you know, that this effect on their pocketbook, because PG&E's rates keep climbing and the highest profits ever. So is anybody want to try and field that? Because I struggle with it when I talk to people like, we need to do renewables. Sorry, it hurts you in the pocketbook every year more and more. How do we address that?
Is that going to take a crack at that?
Yes.
I think a lot of the answer to that lies in, you know, what economists call externalized and internalized costs. I think, you know, we won't necessarily see a day when kilowatt hour per kilowatt hour that it's cheaper to generate energy with renewable resources instead of the stuff we relied on. I expect it will happen because I do think that fossil fuels are going to get more and more expensive as they get harder and harder to recover. You know, we're having to, you know, go out deeper into the ocean to drill deeper oil and gas wells, you know, crazy things like, you know, the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe that happened because of having to like do crazy things to retrieve fossil fuels as they become more scarce. But even if that's not the case, you know, I think we do need to stay focused on the bigger picture and think of those externalized costs. In other words, you know, what are the healthcare costs to a community of people that are being harmed, you know, emissions from fossil fuel plants, you know, or what are the risks that we run of, you know, disasters from nuclear plants, you know, contaminating huge parts of the environment and harming people. So, you know, it's a more difficult and nuanced conversation to have with people. But I think if you look at the total social cost, I think we certainly can expect that that's going to be lower in the future than what we've been paying when you take all those externalities into consideration. The good news, though, if you are just looking at it, you know, in terms of pocketbook, the good news is that, well, there's like a company called Lazards that does these nice graphs that they publish that show how costs of different energy sources are tracking over time. And they do this thing called levelized cost of energy that really creates an apples to apples comparison of these resources. And really, solar and wind have come down to where, in most cases, building new solar and wind projects is cheaper kilowatt hour per kilowatt hour than building new coal and natural gas fired plants. So that's great news. And it's really explaining why there is so much investment, in red states and blue states in new wind and solar projects. Now, the catch is, of course, that those plants don't deliver the power exactly when you need it. So then you have to make additional investment in energy storage projects, be it batteries or pumped hydro or what have you, to make that energy delivery match the time when the loads occur. So it continues to be, a challenge financially to, make energy that's really, meeting all the kind of deliverability criteria of the old, dispatchable or base load power plants to customer loads. You do have other resources like geothermal, which is really nice because it's, available 24/7 round the clock, as is biomass power. Geothermal is pretty expensive, on a cost per kilowatt hour basis. So, that continues to be a challenge, but there are new technologies coming out that will hopefully bring down cost and also make it possible to develop geothermal projects in places where to date has not been feasible to build these plants.
No, that's super helpful. I often forget to mention the externalities of fossil fuel energy creation. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
I would just add one thing to that, Scott. I don't necessarily, I think California would need to build out any type of new power generation, not specific to renewable, to meet projected load growth. So, what you're saying with the build out, it's not, California's goals does say it's tied to renewable, but with the electrification of the transportation sector and these data centers, which are now showing to be huge drivers of future load growth, it's inevitable that it's going to happen.
We did recently get a study that projects that California is not going to see nearly as much of that data center load growth as other states, which is a little counterintuitive because you think, man, Silicon Valley, we're like the tech capital. Why wouldn't we have loads of data centers? But data centers don't really need to be like close to like the data load, they can be pretty much located anywhere. And so the developers of them are choosing to build them in states where electricity is cheap, not surprisingly, and where capital costs of building infrastructure are lower. And California ranks very poorly on both of those. So according to this study, we're ranked 40th or something out of the 50 states in terms of expected data center development. States like in the South, like Alabama and Mississippi and Virginia is another state that's seeing really big development of data centers and projections. That's going to continue to be really, really big. Not so much in California.
Beth, you want to continue forward or what?
Sure, yeah. That if you're done with questions, that really, wraps it up for us, Scott. I love that Director Bauer asked for a presentation for his jurisdiction, so we'll be happy to organize that. It's, a lot less of a lift now that we've kind of put all these materials together. We can definitely make it not take an hour to present, we'll pull out the highlights, but yeah, it was useful for me also being new to my role to kind of have this opportunity to hear all of this and, work with staff to put it together. So big thanks to all of them for being game for it when it's also quite a busy time with many other things going on. So really appreciate that. So yeah, that kind of concludes the.
Okay. Out to public comment.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Public comments. Thank you.
And nothing in here? All right. Thank you, staff, so much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a great presentation. Thank you.
I will say that, you know, because I'm the water person here, there is a water and energy nexus. And so whenever there is a drought and water starts to become scarce and people start using less water, there should be less energy use as well. For water, for Humboldt Bay Water District, our PG&E bill, it can range, I don't even, it's like 100,000, it's a lot every month because we pump so much water. And I'm sure the munis are like that too, because you're pumping water to get it to the residences, but you're also treating the water, also treating the wastewater, also pumping the wastewater. So there's just so much energy water nexus. Yeah, any other comments from the board? Move on. Again, thank you, staff. That was great. Thanks. All right, let's see, where's the agenda? Here we go. So we have no old business and no new business. Thank you, Director and Executive Director, for Vice Director. No, what's your title? Assistant Deputy, okay. Deputy Director for making that a lightweight agenda so that we could have this study session. So the next is staff reports, 9.1 Executive Director's report.
Yeah, I have just a couple updates that I want to share. We are in budget season, so that's super fun for everybody. And we will be coming out with some doodle polls regarding the finance subcommittee. So just as a reminder, on the finance subcommittee is Director Bauer, Director Garache, Jorgensen, Ramos, and Wilson. So we'll be expecting doodle polls so that we can get those meetings set up. We'll be having one in May before the board meeting to help us prep to make sure what we're presenting to the board is right. And then following the May board meeting, we'll have another one in June before the June board meeting, which will be the final adoption of the budget. So just putting that on everyone's radar. We are still planning for a battery storage presentation. We were hoping to do that relatively soon. We do want to bump it out, so we're still working on the date for that. But just know that that's coming and we don't have a fixed date, but we'll be looking to do a community-wide educational session at the D Street Community Center in Arcata related to battery storage and all of the sort of pressing questions around that. And then just a reminder that the board is going to be meeting back at the Warfinger starting next month, but we'll be upstairs in the great room. So we will have to just miss the pillars being awkwardly spaced. And we will be upstairs. So just remember that when you arrive, we'll be happy to have that new space and see how it works for us. And then the CAC meeting, the next meeting's coming up in May. We'll be talking about kind of, goals and revisiting the subcommittees of the CAC. Those haven't been particularly active, so we want to work with them on which ones we want to kind of reinvigorate and what we want to bring forward. So we'll have a report back on that. And that concludes my announcements. So that's the end of my presentation.
Right. Any questions from the board for Beth? And how about in the public? Anybody out there? No. And nobody in here? Okay. Just going through what you gotta do. Let's see here. So that takes us to future agenda items. Any requests that requires board action be set by the board for future time? Anybody have anything for future agenda items? So what I heard from Jason and Michael was that there was a request for, I just want to make sure that gets in.
Yes,
Okay.
for me.
I would actually like to hear, I know they were very conscious about taking up time, but I would like to hear it.
We'll be sure to report.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so that I think takes us to adjournment. Yeah? Okay, here we go.
Thanks, everyone.
Boy.